Hey church, I'm excited to be with you as we continue to venture through the scriptures. This week we are continuing our journey through Paul's second letter to the church of Thessalonica. In this particular chapter, in chapter 3, which is part of our lectionary reading, Paul is engaging and addressing with a particular issue that the church is experiencing. He writes to the brothers and sisters in this church, and he explains in verse 6 to keep away from every believer who is idle and disruptive and does not live according to the teaching you receive from us. This particular issue of idleness and disruptiveness is what Paul is trying to address. See, the early church were a covenant community. They have made the promises to kind of embody the way of Jesus' teaching together, that they are, intentionally sacrificial with one another. And when there are individuals who are breaking away from that promise, there is an issue for this local community. Some commentaries have described, well, why are people living in this idleness, in this disruptiveness? And if we look at 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, we kind of understand a little bit of the context and what was happening. Both have described kind of the people's understanding of Jesus' kind of return. He is coming back really quickly. And part of it, maybe people are being idle, is that, well, Jesus is coming back anyway, so why do we need to work hard, right? Like, he's going to come back and, we're going to go to heaven and stuff like that, right? But Paul's teaching is not about that. Paul's teaching is about the continual work of the demonstration and the proclamation and the living out, the embodiment of the good news continually until Christ's return. It isn't waiting passively until Christ's return. These words that Paul has written are quite harsh. He says to keep away from every believer. And is that our role, to kind of just judge and separate and cast away others? Well, many of the scholars that have wrestled with this text would challenge that idea. And I think they kind of help us understand a little bit more about what Paul's hope and posture is. The hope isn't to separate people. The hope is that as this church continues to live in accordance to the way of Jesus through the Holy Spirit, that they will challenge these individuals who are living this kind of idle and disruptive life, and to bring them back and to reorient them together as a community that demonstrates the way of the kingdom. So I pray that as you're wrestling with this text, that you're both challenged and encouraged. This isn't a text about just trying to identify the idleness and the disruptiveness in people's lives, but really to see how we can really embody the way of Christ. I want to share with you two things to consider through these texts, and hope that in your time together you would have some time to reflect and to discuss about these two topics. The first one comes at us from verse 11. Paul continues to parse out what is this idle and disruptive life. He says, "We hear that some among you are idle and disruptive. They're not busy, they're busy bodies." They're busy bodies. They are just doing things for the sake of things, but not really purposefully and intentionally doing anything. They just look busy. When I think about that, and as I was preparing for this, it kind of brought me back to when I was younger. I was growing up in the 90s. One of my favorite shows was The Simpsons. The Simpsons is a cartoon that I think is still on today. But they are written as a critique and as a commentary on kind of the current society. And sometimes they kind of interplay with some of the religious aspects of the culture. And in this particular scene that kind of I'm reminded of is where one of the main characters, Homer Simpson, plays one of the Israelites. And he was kind of hanging out with a couple other Israelites, and they were kind of chatting and kind of just spending time, kind of wasting time a little bit, maybe around the water cooler kind of idea. And then one of them turns around and says, "Hey, Moses is coming." And this is trying to explain that Moses is coming back down from the mountain with the stone tablets and the Ten Commandments. And here we see the scene where Homer Simpson, who was one of the Israelites, quickly turns to the other people and he says, "Quick, everybody, look busy. Pretend you are busy. Pretend that you're doing something so that it looks like we're actually doing something." And so as we kind of go back to Paul's words of this idleness, this busybodiness, I think there are times where it's important for us to think about why are we doing what we're doing? And has our culture shaped us and challenged us and kind of pushed us to think that busy is better? I recently read a book by the author A.J. Swoboda, a book called Subversive Sabbath. And in it, he kind of quotes from Joseph Ratzinger, who is the former Pope of the Catholic Church. And there's a particular a phrase that I found it very fascinating. And he says, quoting from Ratzinger, that people fall into the slavery of activity. The slavery of activity. That our culture tells us that we need to be active and constantly active. That we got to be doing something. And if we're not doing something, then we're going to miss out and lose out. It's almost kind of like this fear of missing out idea, that we got to perpetually be doing something. Friends, I want to encourage us to think and to wrestle and to consider what is the deciding factor of what we do. And as we look at even our Google calendars, or like if we have paper calendars, some of us, like myself, still uses a paper calendar. How are we making these decisions of what we schedule in and what we do? Are there spaces where we're just not being busy? Or even just taking a moment to think, like, how would we even describe our week? I, for one, confess that often I use the word busy. I'm very busy. I've been busy. But is that a healthy embodiment of the kingdom? And another thing to consider is, as we look at the decisions that we're making in terms of what we are going to do, is there an invitation from our community to speak into, to challenge us, to inspire us, or to guide us to areas that are not busy? Maybe it's a reminder that we need a Sabbath, we need a rest, we need to take this time to slow down, or maybe we all need to take this time to slow down. Where in kind of our lives are we inviting the community to speak into? I think part of it, this idleness and disruptiveness, isn't just our individual decision, but the hope is that other people will speak into it so that we will not fall into the trap of idleness and disruptiveness. And so, where are the spaces that your community can speak into your life, and how are you speaking into other people's lives? The second area that I want to kind of invite us to consider goes with kind of Paul's second aspect that he was talking about. He writes in verse 9, "We did this," so kind of their way of life, "not because we do not have the rights to such help," like he's not receiving help from other people, "but in order to offer ourselves as a model for you to imitate. For even when we were with you, we gave you this rule: the one who is unwilling to work shall not eat." So Paul is saying, you gotta work, you gotta earn your keep kind of idea. But more than that, what he is describing is this modeling way of life. It's that, much of Paul's writing also kind of emphasized that, as he writes, "Imitate me, kind of follow in my way as I follow in the way of Jesus. Imitate me as I imitate Christ." So there is this idea of following, modeling for other people. That is part of our witness. That is part of the restorative and redemptive process. And I want to share with you kind of like this idea that kind of reminded me of the missiologist, an author, thinker, writer that kind of teaches a lot on mission. His name is Michael Frost, and there was this question that was attributed to him: do you live a questionable life? He kind of unpacks that in some of his talks, where does a Christian's life draw questions from other people? Does it elicit a sense for other people? It's like, well, why do you do what you do? And when Paul describes this modeling, it's very missional, because as you live out this radical, not necessarily radical really, but just this Christ-centered, spirit-empowered way of life, how does that impact your neighborhood and others around you? Does it inspire? Does it challenge? Does it cause people to question? Does your life cause other people to question? And when we look at kind of this busybody idea, it's easy to follow in the culture of busyness around us. But it is hard to live this countercultural way that challenges the busyness of our society and to offer a different way of life, this questionable life that people are like, how come you're taking this day away? Or how come you spend every Sunday morning with this community and you guys have this meal and you slow down? What is it that God is inviting you to live and embody as a way of life that stirs other people to question? And I want to encourage us to consider, well, how are you modeling this? And as you gather as a community, what is it that you're modeling for others? So friends, I pray that as you gather together this week, as you wrestle with this second Thessalonians chapter 3, that you wrestle with these ideas of what kind of activities shape and form your weekly rhythms and daily lives. And are you living individually and collectively a life that is questionable? Not in a negative way, but questionable that stirs the curiosity of the wonder and the beauty of Christ that is being embodied in your community. Have a great discussion and conversation, and God bless.